Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Professor deals out zeros for incompetent and cruel students and threatens fails if they don't write apology letters. With the pandemic, all my classes have been online, though everyone in university is as well. As such, things get interesting. Let me explain. I was participating in one of my lectures, listening to the professor, before another student used the raise hand function on Zoom. The professor paused the lecture, thinking the student had a question. She didn't. Student, Professor, you're wrong. It should be X not Y. A few students make some rude posts in the chat as the professor checks, and realize that yes, the variable should be X, not Y, using arbitrary terms for anonymity. So, she corrects the variable and adjusts her lesson. Simple, easy mistake pointed out and fixed, right? Student should get praised for helping teacher. Wrong. Within minutes hate comments spam the poor girl, and war breaks out. Because half the class is mad that she corrected the professor's mistake and are now shaming her for it. Sadly, the majority are Asians, and I'm not racist, but according to the comments, the student should never correct the teacher and that the student was shaming the teacher. It was cruel, especially since this class is at a Western university. And even some Westerns, given their profile pics, were getting in on it. The other half jumps to the girl's defense, a few Asians even pointing out the differences in culture, but it only gets worse and worse. Then, the professor intervenes, having caught onto the bullying in the chat despite her usually having it not open on her end so we can discuss things privately like in an actual class. Turns out the poor victim had instantly reported it and the professor opened the chat on her end. She lectured the entire class, and said that the bullying better stop or they'd be getting zeros. It seemed to work for 10 minutes, then the professor ended the lecture and started getting mad at the haters. Turns out the bullies had moved to the private chat. I felt really bad for the girl. She had been kind enough to point the mistake out so everyone would learn correctly, and half the class started shaming her for it. I was able to message her privately for her email, and told her that if she needed to talk, my inbox was open. She never responded, and within minutes had logged out. I felt really bad for her. She had to be in tears. I went off on the bullies, with the other students who defended her, and the war got really heated, until the professor just up and ended the meeting. I couldn't blame her. Half her had acted really cruelly. 2 days passed after that, and then in the next lecture meeting the professor told us we were having a surprise test that would be 10% of our final grade. Kinda a big deal. So, we all went to the online platform, opened up the quiz. Lo and behold, the question was based on the one the whole war started over, the one where the variable was corrected. I of course entered in what had been the correct answer, and submitted it. After returning to the lecture meeting, she had us wait until the 30-minute time limit was complete before continuing as though nothing happened. While I had waited, I browsed through the names in the meeting. The victimized student wasn't listed, and I felt really bad. Those bullies had driven her from class for the dumbest reason. The test was strange though, until we had our lecture last Friday. The professor finished the lecture early, then said that our grades on the POP test were now available. And that she was posting a list with everyone's name and grade. She then showed us the list on the shared screen and chaos ensued. Turns out, the bullies had become victims of an upset professor. They now had nice, big fat zeros beside their grades, and were not happy about it according to the comments. Everyone else, aka the ones who stood up, had grades ranging from a decent 70% to a full 100%. I landed a decent 82%, if only because I forgot a small detail. The professor then coldly told everyone that bullying was not appreciated, and that students in the class, no matter religion, had the right to correct the teacher when they were wrong. She also said she had the names of every student who bullied the poor girl, and that they would be hearing from the dean about this, and that their parents, guardians were going to be notified for their awful behavior. She also stated that unless proper letters of apology were written to the victim, then they would get an automatic fail in the course, no matter how good they were in the subject. There was outrage of course, but I was stunned by the professor. She literally got the best revenge against student bullies after they victimized one of her students because she was helpful. It's reading week now, and already I can see that the number of students in the class has dropped a little through the online server. The victimized girl is still there thankfully, and I pray she is doing well. She didn't deserve that. I hope that it doesn't ruin any more future lectures for her. And if any of you bullies are reading this, you got your just desserts. Notes, just wanted to point out a few things. 1. I don't know about the whole culture thing, it was just a guess at the time. One student typed something about honor or something. My best non-culture guess is that they got mad because they wrote it out in pen, didn't figure it out themselves, or were just being jerks. 2. At my university, given the pandemic, all students had to submit forms about their legal guardians, adult or otherwise, in case a student got ill. I don't recall the full details, other than that if a student got hospitalized, then the university would have an alternate way to contact with them and deal with all the legal and coursework stuff. 3. My friends and I are all staying with our parents because it's cheaper and it feels good to be with family given the isolation. And even as an adult, parents can get scary if you do something wrong. My father still gets in trouble with my grandmother at times, which is somewhat funny to watch. Next one is titled, Raise My Rent? I'm outta here and so is my clientele. The best revenge I ever heard of was not mine, but a friend of my father's. There was a bar owner in Astoria who received an enormous rent increase after the landlord noticed how profitable his bar was. The landlord was certain that he would not want to move such an established and profitable business and start over again in a new location. After giving him the bad news, the landlord demanded to know again and again whether he would renew the lease. The bar owner kept mum. On the very last day of the lease, with a bar full of patrons, the bartender announced to all that he had rented the spot across the street from his old place and offered everyone free drinks on the house in exchange for helping him move. They all grabbed tables and chairs and equipment and moved it across the street, piece by piece. Before the day was out, he was moved and without losing a single customer. The landlord got an empty space and the loss of a few months' rent. Next one is titled, Good Luck Finding Another Apartment. So this happened to me about 10 years ago in a big city on the West Coast. I had just finished grad school and was looking for a way to cut down on rent in an already expensive rental market. Now, mind you, I was young, desperate, and inexperienced with roommates at the time, and this was a huge life lesson for me and hopefully for my roommate too. I placed an ad for a roommate on Craigslist, which in hindsight wasn't a smart move. Enter bad roommate. Bad roommate was a few years older than me and at first seemed really cool with a stable job as a licensed masseuse. After interviewing her, hitting it off really well and getting to know each other for about a month, we rented a loft downtown around October with the agreement rent, utilities would be split. Around the time our first rent was due, November, bad roommate said that her work had been slow and she would pay rent in the next 2 weeks. Luckily I had enough in savings so I covered rent. Well, the 2 weeks came and went and still no rent. When I asked her about the rent, she yelled obscenities and accused me of being abusive and harassing her. No kidding, while claiming she didn't have money for rent, she would be out of the house from around 9 a.m. until around 2 a.m., visiting friends. All of this nonsense continued on, as well as other things such as stealing my food and breaking some of my belongings, including a bottle of wine that my recently deceased sister had gifted to me. Bad roommate's excuse was bad energy in the house, while giving me a little smirk. Fast forward to the beginning of December and you guessed it, still no rent. This time, in addition to yelling obscenities, accusing me of being abusive, and breaking my stuff, bad roommate called the police on me, accusing me of making threats. The cops did not do anything as there was no evidence I did anything. For the record, I didn't, but they did give me a lecture about making threats and said next time they come out I could be arrested or forced to leave the residence. By this time I was almost out of savings and was fearing eviction. Bad roommate had not paid rent since move-in. The final straw came when I came home from work to find her threatening my 2 cats who were cowering in the corner. I almost lost it, but due to what happened before with the police I didn't want to poke the fire. This is when I remembered the officer saying I could be forced to leave the residence, and a light bulb went off in my head. Now the revenge part. I called my best friend whose father, best friend's dad, attorney, was an attorney. After a phone consultation with him, he told me to pay up the rent and utilities through December and then simply surrender my key, garage remote, etc. with a signed note saying that I surrender possession of the property with a specified date. I snapped a photo of this note and left it with the secretary in the management office. I then proceeded to sign a new lease with the last of my savings. 1 week before Christmas, while Bad Roommate was out visiting friends, I packed up all of my belongings and left the house pretty much empty except for a few belongings she had, a little bit of food and her bed. After about 2 days of angry voicemails, texts, and missed calls from Bad Roommate telling me what a horrible and irresponsible person I was to do this, boom, dead silence until April. In April I was served with a summons for breach of contract for abandoning the lease by the landlord. I contacted the attorney aka best friend's dad and filed a response to the court with a hearing date set in late May. I showed up to the hearing with my friend's dad, attorney, and his 2 I'm guessing they were assistants. Bad Roommate was also there looking smug, think wine bottle incident smirk. Next thing I know, the other attorney announces they are dismissing me from the lawsuit since I surrendered possession of the property, but they were not dismissing it against Bad Roommate. Bad Roommate's face went gaunt, the smirk disappeared and it was priceless. After some back and forth with her almost getting held in contempt of court for outbursts, the judge ruled against my roommate with the full judgment awarded to the landlord. The first cherry on top? Best friend's dad represented me pro bono. The final cherry on top? I came to find out a month later via an angry voicemail from Bad Roommate that after being kicked out of a friend's house while couch surfing, her credit was trashed, she had an eviction on her record, and subsequently could not get another apartment, and that again I was a horrible irresponsible person. I never heard from her again afterward, but she was on the news a few months later, mugshot and all, for trashing a convenience store. Last I heard she moved to Las Vegas. In the end, my credit did take a small hit. Even though the suit was dismissed, the debt was put into collections and reported to the credit bureau. For the next 4 years, I tried unsuccessfully to have it removed. At the 4-year anniversary of the lawsuit, I petitioned the credit bureau under the advice of my friend's dad, attorney, to clear my record as the statute for filing suit had expired at the 4-year mark. Failure to comply with the request would result in a lawsuit against the credit bureau for slander of credit. To be honest, I just followed his instructions, not knowing what I was even talking about. A couple of days later I received a call that my record had been cleared. Long story, but in the end, it was worth it to get back at an otherwise horrible person. Next one is titled, Can't Keep the Answers to Yourself? Okay, get ready for a mega spoiler. This happened in NYC, on the subway. Russell, in his early 30s, is sitting on a fairly crowded subway doing the crossword puzzle, minding his own business. Much of the puzzle is filled in, but Russell is struggling with a few of the answers. Do you want to know what 15 across is? Russell looks up and sees a man smiling down at him, a snobby professorial type, tweed coat, khakis, sensible shoes. The smug look on the guy's face tells Russell that the guy clearly knows the answer to 15 across and wants to tell him. No thanks, Russell answers and looks away, as the guy tells him the answer anyway. Russell gives him a withering look, but I guess that's just the reaction the professorial douchebag wanted. How about 20 down? I can tell you what that is too, he says to Russell, who is pretending not to hear him. But the douchebag gives Russell the answer anyway, and at this point, Russell is upset. He calls the guy in a hole and puts away the paper. His beloved morning crossword puzzle has now been ruined for him. That's the end of that. Except, Russell is fuming, wishing he could ruin the guy's day, when he notices that the douchebag is reading a book. It is a book by Richard Yates and Russell has read it. And then it happens. Something pops into Russell's head and he smiles. Now it's Russell's stop, time to get off, and he passes by the douchebag reading the book to exit the subway. Russell asks him, do you want to know how the book ends? The man looks up, alarmed to see Russell exiting the subway. Of course not, he says. She tries to give herself an abortion with a coat hanger and dies. And the doors shut. Next one is titled, Thief Tried to Steal My Car, Accidentally Filled It Up with Gas and Brought It Back to Me Instead. My first car was a 1984 Jeep CJ7, a pretty sweet ride for a dirt-poor teenager in the 90s. I was working midnights at a gas station and loaned it to my brother who was taking a date to a party. I got a call around 1 a.m. from my brother who told me he left the keys in the Jeep and it was stolen. I was devastated. I was still on the phone with my brother when the thieves pulled my Jeep into my gas station to fill up on gas. As luck would have it, the gas gauge on my Jeep was broken and always read empty, and I worked at the only 24-hour gas stations in the area. I pressed the silent alarm and proceeded to fill up my Jeep. It was a full-serve station. When the thieves were out of the Jeep, I saw an opportunity to slip the key out of this ignition and into my pocket. They paid for the gas, and argued amongst each other who had the keys last. The delay was enough for the police to arrive. I had to explain the story to the officer half a dozen times before he understood. The thieves had this stunned look of disbelief on their faces I'll never forget. The cops were belly laughing, telling the story to dispatch, all the while the thieves sat in cuffs in the back of the squad car. The story made most of the major newspapers the following day. Next one is titled, "He Made Sure Those Kids Were Taught a Very Valuable Life Lesson About Patience." I was living in a Middle Eastern country a few years back. Nice place, but because 50% of the population in the region is under the age of 20, the roads are simply overrun by teenage and early 20s hooligans. The culture's fatalism makes young guys even more reckless and irresponsible than they are already programmed to be by their hormones. So, after a rare rain shower, the highway becomes flooded up ahead. 18 inches deep. Traffic is backed up for at least a mile, and it takes us 15 minutes to get to the flooded patch. Everyone is upset. Then I see two cars full of teenage yahoos passing people on the shoulder on the right from way behind me. Motherducker, there's just no excuse for that crap. Eventually, they get to where I am, and they pass me just as we're reaching the 50-yard stretch where the flooding is crossing the road. One of them crosses into the far left lane, and one stays in the right lane to avoid the deep water in the middle lane. And wouldn't you know it, their windows are rolled down. I'm in a Toyota Land Cruiser, nice big 4WD. So while they're crawling through a foot of water in their little Action Boy Hondas, I decide to gun it between them through the deep stuff in the middle lane. The wave from my front wheels was about 6 feet high, and it had to have put 20 gallons of water through the windows of both cars. Completely, freaking, drenched, all of them, with nasty urban storm water runoff. Of course, they chased up after me once they cleared the water, screaming and cursing, but I just pretended to be on my phone and ignored them. Eventually, they gave up and, I hope, figured I had just been as impatient and selfish as them and had hosed them by accident. Last one is titled, "Don't Want to Listen When I Say the Van Needs Repairs." Steak dinner and overtime on you. So I was a driver for a little company that rhymes with Slamazon. I had been there for several months by this point and had developed a reputation of being very anal about vehicle maintenance. We aren't talking like washing them or whatnot, but cleaning out urine bottles, fixing broken wiper blades, installing lights to replace the burnt out ones, or other stuff that would indicate you actually remotely care for your driver's well-being. Seriously guys, I had a van once with no working lights of any kind, and the passenger side door fell off its hinges right in front of my dispatchers, and they still sent me out. Needless to say, some trips were better than others, but this particular time, well, it was a doozy. You see, friends, I was considered a problem driver by some for being obsessed with vehicles being kept road legal. I had not caused any issues other than this. We had dispatchers that were promoted up after a month, and after hitting mailboxes, cars, and other kinds of insanity, but I was always skipped over. This naturally irked me to no end, and I was looking for better within 6 months of starting. I was there for nearly 2 years. Naturally, all my requests for the essential equipment and urine bottle removal was denied, so I'd buy bulbs for my van, and pull them out after my route was done so I could put them into the next one day, and I chucked pee bottles out on the record. Kinda gross, but better than smelling it in the hot Georgia sun in the middle of summer in a van with sometimes working AC. This nonsense continued for the entirety of my time there, of course. This event, however, was the first of many times I decided to get back at the dispatchers for messing with my routes and giving me the worst vans, and so on. You see, this van had the lights that were bad. Broken AC, shook like mad, squeaked, smelled like pee, and musty taco farts. The door didn't properly lock, so anybody could have stolen packages from it, and not much could be done. And to top this all off, 4 bad tires. Like metal bands exposed, and one bulging out in its death throes. The whole day, I babied this van as best I could. Putting air in the tire a few times, and just barely finished my route with some daylight to spare. So, 10 hours on the road down and an hour and a half back to the distribution center. I get underway and get about halfway before I felt the telltale shake of a tire going out. Well crap, here we go, I say to myself and scan my surroundings. I am on the interstate, and not very far from an off-ramp. So with what little tire I have left, I limp off the ramp, and to a parking lot which is right next to an Applebee's. Perfect luck, all things considered. I call dispatch, and give my exact location, and tell them what happened. The conversation goes like this. That's it. Me, hey, I got a flat over here at my location. Dispatcher, what, how? Me, because you sent me out in a van that needed tires? Dispatcher, fine, whatever, everyone has gone home, so you are gonna have to wait till I get there. Me, sure, that's fine, I'll stay clocked in, then. Dispatcher, aha, you finished your route, so I don't see why you would be on the clock. Me, because I am still in command of this vehicle, I have the keys, and if you want me to give it back, you are going to keep me on the clock. I had called the company HR and explained everything before I called dispatcher, and they ensured me that my time would be recorded. Dispatcher, fine, I have things to do tonight, so we gotta hurry up. Perfect. Time to screw with this guy. After giving him extremely vague directions while I enjoy a steak meal, and a large beer, on the clock, and no ducks given anymore, he finally finds it. I go out there, and see that he has brought the smallest, saddest, most not suitable for the task jack in the center. Me, well get to it, you made me leave with this van, and you can change the tire. Dispatcher, NUHR, you were driving it, and I interject. Me, drivers are not allowed, but company policy to perform repairs to the van. He had yelled at me previously for doing this with the bulbs. Only dispatch, management, maintenance, and the repair shop can repair the van. So I walk away to finish my meal, while he tries to fix this flat with a jack barely able to lift the front of the vehicle and needed bricks, and other items to even go high enough. In total, I wasted 4 hours of his time, cost him time to smoke up, and he missed the game that he apparently had money on. I got my meal effectively for free with the hefty overtime I got that week. And as an extra smackdown, corporate came in and fired the manager, assistant manager, and this particular dispatcher for failure to maintain the vehicles to DOT standards, and for mismanaging the DSP, delivery service provider, after my lovely chat with HR during the incident. I showed them the text messages, and some of the recorded audio I had taken of a dispatcher being a general douche canoe. A week later, and we had a temp management comprised of corporate operations that would oversee the vans getting replaced with less shitty ones, training new management, and of course, giving training on what to do if you have a vehicle fail like that, and granting drivers some maintenance permissions. Thanks for listening.